The sun had just started to rise, casting a warm glow over the quiet suburban street. The houses were all neatly lined up, each with a perfectly trimmed lawn and fresh flowers in the garden. The air smelled faintly of morning dew, mixed with the scent of freshly brewed coffee from a neighbor's kitchen. Life here had always been calm, predictable, and peaceful. The homeowner, a middle-aged man who had lived in this neighborhood for over a decade, stepped outside with his trash can. It was a normal morning just like any other. He had a routine he followed religiously: take out the trash, water the plants, and enjoy a few moments on the porch before starting the day. He liked these quiet moments, the feeling of stability and control over his small world. As he pulled his trash can to the curb, he noticed something unusual. The lid was slightly open and the can looked as if it had been moved slightly from its usual spot. At first he thought maybe the wind had shifted it during the night. But something didn't feel right. He shrugged it off and continued with his routine, thinking it was probably nothing. The man had always enjoyed good relationships with his neighbors. He knew most of them by name and often exchanged greetings or short conversations when taking walks or tending to their yards. The sense of community made him feel safe and content. But recently, there had been whispers about one of the neighbors, a woman who was known for being very controlling about rules and regulations. People often referred to her as the HOA Karen behind her back. She had a reputation for keeping a sharp eye on everyone's property and pointing out minor mistakes, sometimes exaggerating them. He had never had any real problems with her. They had exchanged polite words at community meetings and social gatherings, and that had been the extent of their interaction. But he had heard stories from other neighbors, stories about disputes over garden decorations, paint colors, and trash placement. Some neighbors had even had to pay fines for small things, all because of her relentless attention to the rules. That morning, as he walked back inside, he tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Life had been peaceful for so long, and he didn't want to start worrying over something as trivial as a trash can. Still, he couldn't completely ignore the sense that something was changing. The following days confirmed his suspicion. Each morning he found his trash can in the wrong place, sometimes toppled over, spilling trash onto the curb. At first it happened only occasionally. He assumed it was accidental, maybe a gust of wind or a careless neighbor's pet, but soon it became a pattern, happening almost every other day. He started arriving outside earlier to check the can, making sure it was standing straight and empty before taking it to the curb. He even began to document the incidents with his phone, capturing images of the overturned trash and the mess it created. Despite his attempts to maintain calm, frustration began to creep in. It was more than just the inconvenience. It was the sense of being targeted, of someone deliberately disrupting his life. He remembered the stories he had heard about the HOA Karen and began to wonder if she was involved. The thought made his stomach tighten. He didn't want to believe it, but the timing and frequency of the incident seemed too intentional to be random. One evening, while taking out the trash after dinner, he saw her. She was standing across the street, her arms crossed, watching intently. She didn't look pleased, and when their eyes met, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He felt a chill run down his spine. It was clear she was aware of him, aware of the trash can, and possibly enjoying the control she seemed to exert over the situation. He quickly finished his task and went back inside, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. The next day, he decided to try a different approach. He left a small note on the trash can, polite and neutral, simply asking that it not be disturbed. He wasn't sure if she would even read it, but it felt like a step toward taking back some control. When he checked the next morning, the can was still overturned. The note had been gone. His frustration deepened, and he realized that this was no longer a simple neighborhood nuisance. This was becoming a battle, one that he hadn't asked for but now had to confront. He began talking to other neighbors, trying to gauge if anyone else had experienced similar behavior. Some admitted that they had, while others were hesitant to get involved, fearing conflict or retaliation. One neighbor mentioned that she had seen the HOA Karen scrutinizing other homes for minor infractions, always looking for reasons to complain or exert authority. It was becoming clear that this was part of her pattern, a way to assert control over the neighborhood in ways that went beyond simple rule enforcement. Despite the tension, he tried to remain calm and collected. He reminded himself that he was not the problem, and that he had every right to live peacefully on his property. He started taking pictures daily, recording videos, and keeping detailed notes about each incident. It was a meticulous process, but it gave him a sense of empowerment and a way to protect himself in case the situation escalated further. Life at home started to change subtly. The quiet mornings he had once cherished were now tinged with anxiety. He found himself glancing out the window more often, wondering if the trash can had been moved or if the HOA Karen was lurking nearby. Even small tasks became stressful. The simple act of taking out the trash, which had been routine for years, now felt like a minefield. The man realized that the intrusion into his daily life was more than just an annoyance. It was a disruption that affected his peace of mind. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Some neighbors sympathized with him and offered words of encouragement, while others seemed wary, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. It was a strange mix of support and caution, reflecting the delicate balance of community dynamics. He appreciated those who reached out, knowing that he was not completely alone in facing this challenge. Through all of this, he tried to maintain his composure and live his life as normally as possible. He continued his morning routine, watered his plants, and enjoyed brief moments on the porch with his coffee. But the underlying tension never fully disappeared. Every morning brought the uncertainty of whether the trash can would be in its proper place, or if the pattern of harassment would continue. He realized that this was not just about trash. It was about asserting boundaries, standing up to unreasonable behavior, and protecting his right to live peacefully. As the days passed, he grew more determined. He knew that the situation required careful handling, documentation, and patience. He could not allow anger or frustration to dictate his actions. Instead, he focused on gathering evidence, observing patterns, and understanding the behavior he was dealing with. He was learning that sometimes the best way to confront a problem was not with confrontation, but with preparation and knowledge. In these quiet, reflective moments, he also thought about the community he loved. Despite the challenges posed by one difficult neighbor, he knew that the majority of people in the neighborhood were kind and considerate. This gave him hope that the situation could eventually be resolved, that the sense of peace could return, and that boundaries could be respected without escalating conflict unnecessarily. The man went to bed that night with a sense of cautious optimism. He knew that the battle over a trash can might seem trivial to outsiders, but to him, it represented much more: respect, autonomy, and the right to live without unnecessary interference. He resolved to continue documenting, observing, and maintaining his composure, understanding that this was only the beginning of a larger story. Life had been quiet and predictable, but now it had taken a turn, and he was ready to face it one morning, one trash can at a time. The days that followed were frustrating and strange. The man tried his best to continue his normal routine, but the recurring trash can incidents were making it impossible to ignore what was happening. Every morning he would go outside with a sense of unease, wondering if the can would be standing as it should or if it would be tipped over, spilling garbage onto the sidewalk. It was hard to predict, and that unpredictability gnawed at him. He began to notice a pattern. The trash can was almost always disturbed after nights when he had gone to bed early, leaving the street quiet. It was as if someone was waiting for the perfect moment, taking their time to make sure it was noticed. The feeling of being watched became stronger. Sometimes he would catch glimpses of movement from the corner of his eye, but when he turned, no one was there. The street seemed ordinary, peaceful even, but he could sense that something under the surface was off. One evening, as he carried the last bag of trash out, he saw her again. She was across the street, leaning slightly against her car, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't wave or smile. She just watched. The man felt a lump in his throat. It was clear that she was aware of him and that she was intentional in her actions. He tried to ignore her, focused on finishing his task, but a part of him couldn't help thinking about what might come next. He started making small changes. He began taking the trash out at different times, trying to disrupt the pattern, hoping to catch whoever was causing this off guard. Sometimes he would wait until the sun was fully up, sometimes just before sunrise. But no matter what he did, the trash can would end up disturbed. Occasionally, he would catch her glance or movement from across the street, and he realized that this was deliberate. She was actively watching, actively controlling, and he felt trapped in a situation he hadn't asked for. His frustration grew, but he tried to remain calm. He kept notes, photographs, and even short videos. Every time the can was overturned, he documented it, labeling the date, time, and condition. It felt like preparing for something bigger, like gathering proof to show that he was being unfairly targeted. Each incident made him more determined not to let the situation get the best of him. He knew he had to stay calm, rational, and organized. Neighbors started noticing the tension too. Some would smile politely when they saw him, offering small comments about the weather or the flowers in his garden, but he could sense their curiosity. A few neighbors who had witnessed similar behavior from the HOA Karen began to whisper advice. They shared stories of being fined for minor issues or having their belongings questioned, but most were cautious about getting directly involved. The man appreciated the advice but realized he had to handle this situation carefully, without escalating conflict unnecessarily. One afternoon, he tried to address the issue directly. He walked across the street, keeping his tone polite, and asked her if she had seen the trash can incidents and if there was an issue he should be aware of. She smiled faintly but didn't answer directly. Instead, she made vague statements about keeping the neighborhood neat and following the rules. It was clear she had no intention of acknowledging her actions, and any attempt at conversation left him feeling frustrated and powerless. It was a small but significant lesson. He couldn't expect cooperation from someone determined to act according to their own rules. Life at home began to feel heavier. The stress from these incidents seeped into other parts of his day. He found himself double-checking doors and windows, thinking about the trash can more often than he wanted to, and feeling anxious about going outside. The quiet peace he once enjoyed in the mornings was gone, replaced by a constant sense of vigilance. Even small noises, like the rustle of leaves or a car door shutting, made him pause and look around, half expecting another disruption. The man also noticed changes in his emotional state. There were moments of anger, where he wanted to confront her directly and demand an explanation. There were also moments of sadness, a feeling of unfairness that someone would choose to make life difficult for no good reason. He realized that this wasn't just about trash, it was about boundaries, respect, and personal space. He felt a mixture of determination and exhaustion, knowing that he had to navigate this carefully. Despite the tension, he continued trying to maintain some normalcy. He watered his plants, tended to the garden, and even tried to enjoy brief moments of peace on the porch with a cup of coffee. These small routines helped him maintain a sense of control and reminded him that life was bigger than the conflict over a trash can. Yet the anxiety lingered, a reminder that he was living with an unpredictable and invasive presence. One evening, while documenting another incident, he noticed something unusual. A neighbor from a few houses down, someone who usually kept to themselves, approached him cautiously. They shared that they had seen similar behavior from the HOA Karen with other homes, small things like knocking over objects or leaving notes about minor infractions. It was not an isolated case. Hearing this was both comforting and disheartening. Comforting because he wasn't alone, disheartening because it confirmed that the actions were deliberate and part of a pattern. The man started thinking more strategically. He realized that he needed more than just documentation. He needed a plan to protect himself and his property. He considered discussing the situation with the HOA officially, presenting his evidence and requesting that they intervene to prevent further harassment. He knew that approaching the situation rationally and calmly was important, especially since any overreaction could be used against him. In the meantime, he continued taking small precautions. He placed heavier items inside the trash can to prevent it from being easily tipped, made sure it was emptied promptly, and even considered installing a camera to capture real-time footage. Every step was taken carefully, with the intention of protecting his home and maintaining peace without escalating the situation. It was a delicate balance, trying to assert boundaries while remaining respectful and composed. The street, once a place of quiet enjoyment and neighborly smiles, had changed in subtle ways. He noticed fewer people walking casually, more doors closing quickly, and a general sense of cautious observation. The conflict had created ripples in the community, making everyone aware that something was happening, even if most did not want to get involved directly. It was a strange mix of awareness and avoidance, leaving him to navigate the tension largely on his own. Despite the challenges, the man tried to hold on to his sense of optimism. He reminded himself that he was doing the right thing by documenting, observing, and preparing for any escalation. He understood that patience and careful planning were key, and that responding impulsively could make the situation worse. It was a lesson in restraint, self-control, and the importance of standing up for oneself calmly. As the days turned into weeks, the incidents continued, but the man felt a growing sense of readiness. He was no longer just reacting. He was observing patterns, learning about the behavior, and understanding the mindset of someone determined to control others. He realized that knowledge and preparation were his best tools, giving him a sense of power even in the face of ongoing harassment. Evenings were spent reviewing notes, photographs, and videos, piecing together a timeline of incidents. Each entry reinforced the fact that this was deliberate, that it was not random, and that he needed to stay vigilant. The process was meticulous and sometimes exhausting, but it gave him a sense of structure and control amidst the chaos. It was a way to reclaim his peace of mind, one documented incident at a time. Through it all, the man maintained his connection with supportive neighbors, those who offered quiet encouragement and advice. Their presence, even if minimal, reminded him that he was not completely alone. He found small comfort in shared experiences, realizing that community could be a source of strength, even in difficult times. By the end of Part 2, the man had grown more aware, more cautious, and more determined. The repeated incidents had changed his daily life, but they had also strengthened his resolve. He understood that the path ahead required patience, careful observation, and strategic action. The battle over the trash can was no longer just a nuisance. It had become a lesson in resilience, boundaries, and the quiet strength needed to face someone intent on disruption. And he knew that the story was far from over. The tension in the neighborhood continued to rise, and the man could feel it with every morning he stepped outside. The trash can incidents were now a daily occurrence, and the emotional toll was becoming heavier. He had tried to stay calm and rational, but the constant disruption was starting to wear him down. It was no longer just about the trash can. It was about respect, boundaries, and the invasion of his personal space. One morning, as he stepped outside with his coffee in hand, he saw her again. The HOA Karen was standing on her porch, arms crossed, a slight smirk on her face. It was clear that she had been watching, as always. This time she didn't bother hiding it. The man felt a surge of anger, but he reminded himself to stay calm. Reacting impulsively could escalate the situation, and he needed a clear head. He tried a new approach that day. Instead of ignoring her, he decided to speak directly but politely. He walked over and asked if there was an issue she wanted to discuss, hoping to resolve the problem without confrontation. She responded with vague statements about community rules, tidiness, and responsibility. Her tone was calm but dismissive, giving nothing concrete. He realized that she wasn't interested in a conversation. She was interested in control. Frustration bubbled up inside him, but he took a deep breath and walked back to his home. He knew that losing his temper would only play into her hands. Instead, he focused on documenting everything. Photos, notes, and videos became his armor against the harassment. Each record strengthened his resolve, reminding him that he was acting reasonably and that he had the right to live peacefully in his own home. Despite these precautions, the incidents kept happening. The trash can was overturned, sometimes with objects scattered around it, making the cleanup even more frustrating. On some days he would see neighbors walking by, giving sympathetic glances but saying nothing. It was as if everyone knew what was happening, but no one wanted to confront the situation directly. The man felt a mix of isolation and determination. He couldn't rely on others to intervene. He had to take control himself. He began to notice patterns in her behavior. She would appear at certain times, especially when the street was quiet. She seemed to enjoy the power she held, the ability to cause disruption without facing consequences. The man realized that this wasn't just about rules or community standards. It was about her asserting authority, testing boundaries, and seeing how much she could influence others. Understanding her motives gave him a new perspective, even if it didn't make dealing with her any easier. One afternoon, things escalated further. As he was taking out the trash, she came outside and started speaking in a sharp tone, accusing him of violating some imaginary rule about trash placement. She claimed that his trash can was not properly aligned with the curb and that he was setting a bad example for the neighborhood. The man tried to explain calmly, showing her photos and videos of his daily routine. She listened briefly, then waved him off, insisting that she had the authority to enforce rules and that he needed to comply. The confrontation left him shaken. He felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and disbelief. How could someone act so aggressively over something so minor? He realized that this was not just a personal dispute. It was about understanding power dynamics and learning how to navigate unreasonable behavior. He reminded himself that he needed to stay calm, keep detailed records, and avoid giving her any ammunition to escalate further. After that incident, the man began to plan more carefully. He thought about ways to prevent the trash can from being overturned and how to protect his property without provoking her further. He considered installing cameras, adjusting the timing of trash placement, and even speaking to the HOA formally. Each step required careful thought, balancing the need for protection with the risk of escalating conflict. He understood that patience and strategy were essential. Despite his careful planning, the emotional strain continued. He found himself constantly thinking about the situation, replaying interactions in his mind and feeling the weight of the ongoing harassment. The street, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt tense and unpredictable. Even small sounds made him pause and look around, wondering if another incident was about to occur. The stress seeped into his daily life, affecting sleep, concentration, and overall well-being. Neighbors continued to notice the tension. Some offered words of encouragement, while others seemed wary of getting involved. The man appreciated the support, but he realized that he had to handle the situation largely on his own. It was a test of resilience, patience, and the ability to maintain composure in the face of unreasonable behavior. Each day became a challenge, not just physically but emotionally, as he navigated the complex dynamics of his neighborhood. One evening, he decided to take a walk to clear his mind. As he walked, he observed the neighborhood with fresh eyes. He noticed small details he had overlooked before, the way some neighbors avoided eye contact, the careful placement of objects in front of homes, and the subtle ways people maintained distance. The situation with the HOA Karen had changed the social fabric of the street, creating an undercurrent of caution and unease. He realized that his experience was part of a larger pattern, a reminder of how one individual's behavior could affect an entire community. Returning home, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He knew that he could not control her behavior, but he could control his response. He focused on documenting incidents, planning his next steps, and maintaining his composure. He reminded himself that acting calmly and rationally was the best way to protect himself and his home. Each action he took was deliberate, a small step toward regaining control and restoring peace. The next morning brought another incident. The trash can was overturned again, this time with some of his belongings slightly damaged. He felt a surge of frustration but also a sense of clarity. This was no longer just a minor nuisance. It was a deliberate attempt to disrupt his life. He photographed the scene, took notes, and reviewed his plan for addressing the situation with the HOA. He understood that this was a turning point, a moment that required careful action and thoughtful strategy. In the following days, the man continued his efforts to manage the situation. He experimented with different times for taking out the trash, reinforced the can to prevent it from tipping, and remained vigilant for any signs of escalation. He also reached out to neighbors discreetly, seeking advice and support without creating further conflict. The process was slow and sometimes discouraging, but it was necessary to maintain control and protect his property. Throughout all of this, he reflected on the lessons he was learning. He realized that standing up to unreasonable behavior required patience, careful observation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. It was not about winning a confrontation, but about maintaining boundaries, documenting evidence, and asserting his rights in a rational and measured way. Each day of careful planning and observation strengthened his resolve and helped him navigate the ongoing challenges. By the end of Part 3, the man had grown more strategic, more aware, and more determined to protect himself and his property. The confrontations with the HOA Karen had escalated, but he had learned valuable lessons about patience, resilience, and the importance of documenting incidents. The conflict over the trash can was no longer a simple nuisance. It had become a test of character, a lesson in maintaining composure and asserting boundaries in the face of deliberate harassment. He knew that the situation was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next with careful planning and determination. The tension that had been building over weeks reached a new level one bright morning. The man had just finished his usual morning routine and stepped outside to check the trash can. What he saw made his heart sink. A tow truck was parked in front of his driveway, and the driver was looking at his car with a clipboard in hand. His stomach tightened and he quickly realized what had happened. The HOA Karen had called a tow truck, claiming that his vehicle was violating some neighborhood rule. He knew this was completely false, but seeing the tow truck there made the situation painfully real. He immediately grabbed his phone and ran outside, showing the driver his license, registration, and the fact that his car was parked legally. The driver glanced at the papers and then at him, looking uncomfortable. It was clear that the driver had no intention of towing the car without proper justification. The man explained calmly that there had been a misunderstanding, and showed the photos and videos he had collected over the weeks, proving that his car had always been in compliance with HOA rules. Meanwhile, across the street, the HOA Karen stood on her porch, watching with a faint, satisfied smile. Her eyes flicked between the man and the tow truck, as if she were orchestrating the scene like a director. The man could feel the weight of her gaze, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew that losing control now would only make things worse. After a few tense minutes, the tow truck driver finally nodded and stepped away, clearly deciding not to tow the vehicle. The man breathed a sigh of relief but felt a lingering sense of anger and frustration. He had narrowly avoided a serious escalation, but the intent behind the action was clear. The HOA Karen was willing to go to great lengths to assert control and create chaos in his life. Determined to take action, the man returned inside and immediately began organizing all of his evidence. He compiled photos, videos, and detailed notes, creating a clear timeline of incidents. Each record told a story of harassment, showing that the actions were deliberate and consistent. He knew that presenting this to the HOA was the only way to protect himself and prevent further escalation. Over the next few days, he carefully drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, detailing the repeated incidents and the false tow truck claim. He included timestamps, photos, and descriptions of each occurrence, making it impossible to ignore. He focused on facts, avoiding emotional language, knowing that a clear and rational presentation would carry more weight than complaints driven by anger. The community started to react subtly to the ongoing tension. Some neighbors expressed quiet support, offering kind words or sharing their own experiences with overzealous HOA members. Others remained distant, wary of becoming involved in what they saw as a potentially volatile situation. The man appreciated the small gestures of encouragement, which reminded him that he was not completely alone in facing this challenge. As he waited for a response from the HOA, he continued to maintain his routines, taking the trash out, tending to his garden, and keeping the property in order. The uncertainty of each morning still weighed on him, but he felt a sense of empowerment in his preparation. By documenting everything meticulously and acting calmly, he had taken control of the situation in a way that prevented impulsive decisions and further conflict. One afternoon, he decided to approach a trusted neighbor for advice. They discussed strategies for addressing the HOA Karen's behavior and ways to protect personal property. The neighbor suggested methods for reinforcing the trash can to prevent tipping and recommended remaining polite but firm in any future interactions. Their conversation gave him new ideas for handling incidents and reminded him that community support, even limited, could be valuable. Despite the growing tension, the man also focused on self-care. He knew that stress could affect his judgment, so he spent time walking in the neighborhood, reading, and enjoying moments of quiet reflection. These practices helped him maintain a clear mind and stay prepared for any further challenges. He understood that protecting his peace of mind was just as important as protecting his property. Then came another morning that tested his patience and composure. As he stepped outside, he found the trash can overturned yet again, this time with garbage scattered across the curb. He took a deep breath, knowing that reacting in anger would only play into her intentions. Instead, he photographed the scene, documented the date and time, and reviewed the notes he had compiled over the weeks. Each incident was now part of a comprehensive record, strengthening his position and clarifying the pattern of harassment. He realized that the situation with the HOA Karen had escalated beyond petty annoyance. It was a deliberate campaign to unsettle him and assert dominance in the neighborhood. Understanding her motives helped him respond strategically. He focused on calm, rational actions, using documentation and formal channels to protect himself while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. After reviewing his evidence, he decided it was time to schedule a meeting with the HOA board. He prepared a concise presentation, outlining the repeated incidents, the false tow truck claim, and the ongoing harassment. He made sure to remain professional and factual, understanding that emotion-driven complaints could be dismissed. His goal was not revenge but resolution and protection of his rights. On the day of the meeting, he presented his case clearly and calmly. The HOA board listened, reviewed the evidence, and asked questions to clarify details. His meticulous documentation impressed them, leaving little room for doubt about the pattern of harassment. They acknowledged the seriousness of the situation and assured him that steps would be taken to prevent further incidents and address the HOA Karen's behavior. Leaving the meeting, he felt a sense of relief. While the underlying tension with the HOA Karen remained, he now had formal support and a clear record of incidents. The experience had taught him valuable lessons about patience, preparation, and the importance of maintaining composure in the face of unreasonable behavior. He understood that standing up for oneself required strategy, documentation, and a calm approach. In the following days, the trash can incidents decreased, though the HOA Karen still watched from across the street. The man continued his routines, maintaining the garden, taking out the trash, and documenting any minor occurrences. The street began to feel slightly less tense, as the HOA board's intervention reminded her that there were boundaries she could not cross without consequence. The man reflected on the experience, realizing that it had changed his perspective on community dynamics. He had learned that patience, strategy, and careful observation were essential tools in addressing conflict. He also appreciated the value of documentation and formal channels for resolving disputes. By approaching the situation calmly and rationally, he had regained a sense of control over his life and property. As he walked through his yard one evening, enjoying the quiet, he thought about how small actions could have a big impact. The repeated harassment over something as simple as a trash can had revealed larger lessons about boundaries, resilience, and the power of calm, thoughtful response. He felt proud of his ability to navigate the situation without giving in to anger or fear. By the end of this part, the man had faced one of the most intense challenges of the conflict. The tow truck incident had been a dramatic escalation, but it had also served as a turning point. Through careful documentation, strategic action, and calm persistence, he had established a foundation for protecting himself and maintaining peace in his neighborhood. The story was far from over, but he now had the tools, knowledge, and determination to face whatever came next with confidence and composure.